Chapter 8. Eve chose Myra's recommendation of clams, then treated herself to some of the real yeast bread set in a silver basket on the table. As she ate, she gave Myra a profile of Fitzhugh and the details of his death. "You'd like me to tell you if he was capable of taking his own life, disposed to it, emotionally, psychologically?" Eve cocked a brow. "That's the plan. Unfortunately, I can't do that. I can tell you that everyone is capable of it, given the right circumstances and emotional state." "I don't believe that," Eve said so firmly, so decisively, that Myra smiled. "You're a strong woman, Eve. Now, you've made yourself strong, rational, and tough-minded. You're a survivor. But you remember despair, helplessness, hopelessness." Eve did too well, too clearly. She shifted in her chair. "Fitzhugh wasn't a helpless man. The surface can hide a great deal of turmoil." Dr. Myra held up a hand before Eve could interrupt again. "But I agree with you. Given your profile of him, his background, his lifestyle, I wouldn't tag him as a likely candidate for suicide, certainly not one of such an abrupt and impulsive nature." "It was abrupt," Eve agreed. "I dealt with him in court right before this happened. He was as smug and arrogant and full of his own sense of importance as ever." "I'm sure that's true. I can only say that some of us, many of us, are confronted with some crisis, some personal upheaval of the heart or mind, choose to end it rather than live through it or change it. You and I can't know what Fitzhugh might have found himself confronted with on the night of his death." "That isn't a hell of a lot of help," Eve muttered. "Okay, let me give you two more." Briskly, with a cop's dispassion, she related the other suicides. "Pattern? What did they have in common?" Myra tossed back. "The lawyer, the politician, and the tech. A blip in the brain, maybe." Tapping her fingers on the cloth, Eve frowned. "I've got some chains to pull to get all the data, but it could be the motive. The reason behind it all might be physiological rather than psychological. If there's a connection, I've got to find it." "You're veering out of my field, but if you find data linking the three cases, I'd be happy to do a workup." Eve smiled. "I was counting on it. I don't have a lot of time. The Fitzhugh case can't stay a priority for much longer. If I can't nail something down soon and use it to convince the commander to keep the file open, I'll have to move on." "But for now, Eve." Rena slipped up to the table, looking stunning in an ankle-skimming robe of bleeding rainbow colors. "Well, how nice. I was lunching with an associate and thought I recognized you." "Rena." Eve worked up a smile. She didn't mind looking like a street hawker next to the glamorous redhead, but she did mind having her consult lunch interrupted. "Dr. Myra, Rena at Doctorate." "Gracious." Myra offered a hand. "I've heard of your work and admired it." "Thank you. And I'll say the same. It's an honor to meet one of the top psychiatrists in the country. I've scanned a number of your papers and found them fascinating." "You flatter me." "Won't you sit down? Join us for some dessert?" "I'd love to." Rena flicked a questioning glance at Eve. "If I'm not interrupting official business." "We seem to be finished with that part of the program." Eve looked up at the waiter summoned by a discreet flick of Myra's finger. "Just coffee, house brand, black." "I'll have the same," Myra said. "And a dish of the blueberry trifle." "I'm weak." "So am I." Rena beamed at the waiter as though he would personally prepare her selection, a double latte, and a slice of chocolate sin. "I'm so tired of processed food," she confided to Myra. "I intend to gorge myself while I'm in New York." "And how long will you be in town?" "It depends a great deal on Rourke." She smiled at Eve. "And how long he finds it useful to have me here." "I have a feeling he'll be shipping both William and me off to Olympus within a few weeks." "The Olympus resort's quite an undertaking," Myra commented. "All the blips I've seen on the news and entertainment channels have been fascinating." "He'd like to have it up and fully operational by next spring." Rena ran her hand up and down the trio of gold links she wore around her neck. "We'll see. Rourke usually gets what he wants. Wouldn't you agree, Eve?" "He didn't get where he is by taking no for an answer." "No, Indeed. You were just on the resort. Did he give you a tour of the Autotronics arcade? Briefly. Eve's lips squirked a little. We had a broken bar, a lot of ground to cover in a short time. Rihanna's smile was slow and sly. I imagine you did. But I hope you tried a few of the programs that are in place. William's so proud of those games. And you did mention you'd seen the hologram room in the presidential suite of the hotel. I did. Made use of it several times. Very impressive. Most of that's William's doing other design, but I will take partial credit. We plan to utilize that new system to enhance the treatment of addicts and certain psychoses. She shifted as their coffee and dessert was served. That might be of interest to you, Dr. Myra. It certainly would. It sounds fascinating. It is wickedly expensive right now, but we hope to refine and bring the cost down. But for Olympus, Rock wanted the best and he's getting it. Such as the Lisa droid? Yeah? Eve remembered the stunning female droid with the sultry voice. I've seen her. She'll be in PR and customer service. A very superior model that took months to perfect. Her intelligence chips are unmatched by anything on the market. She'll have decision-making and personality capabilities well beyond the current available units. William and She broke off, chuckling at herself. Listen to me. I just can't get away from work. It's fascinating. Myra dipped delicately into her trifle. Your study of brain patterns and their genetic thrust on personality, and their application to electronics is compelling, even to a dug-in at their roots psychiatrist such as myself. She hesitated, and glanced at Eve. As a matter of fact, your expertise might lend a new angle on a particular case Eve and I were discussing. Oh? Rihanna forked up some chocolate and all but hummed over it. Hypothetical. Myra spread her hands, well aware of the official ban on layman consults. Naturally. Eve drummed her fingers on the table again. She preferred Myra's take, but weighing the options, decided to expand. Apparent self-termination. No known motive, no known predisposition, no chemical inducement, no family history. Behavioral patterns up to point of termination normal. No substantiated signs of depression or personality fluctuations. The subject is a 62-year-old male, professional, high-end education, successful, financially solvent, bisexual, with long-term same-sex marriage. Physical disabilities? None. Clean health card. Rihanna's eyes narrowed in concentration, either over the profile or the dessert she was slowly spooning into her mouth. Any psychological defects? Treatment number. Interesting. I'd love to see the brainwave pattern. Available, currently classified. Rihanna sipped her latte contemplatively. Without any known physical or psychiatric abnormalities, no chemical addictions or usage, I'd lean toward a brain blip. Possible tumor. Yet I assume none showed up in autopsy. Eve thought of the pinprick, but shook her head. Not a tumor. Number. There are cases of predisposition that slide through genetic scanning and evaluation. The brain is a complicated organ and still baffles even the most elaborate technology. If I could see his family history, a broken bar, well, to take a wild guess, I'd say your man had a genetic time bomb that went undetected through normal analysis. He'd reached the point in his life where the fuse ran short. Eve cocked a brow. So he just blew, in a manner of speaking. Rihanna leaned forward. We're all coded in, Eve, in the womb. What we are, who we are, not just the color of our eyes, our build, our skin tones, but our personalities, our tastes, our intellect, and our emotional scale. The genetic code is stamped on us at the moment of conception. It can be altered to a certain extent, but the basis of what we are remains. Nothing can change it. We are what we are born. Eve thought of a filthy room, a blinking red light, and a young girl curled into a corner with a bloody knife. Precisely. Rihanna's smile beamed out. You don't take into account environment, free will, the basic human drive to better oneself. Myra objected. To consider us merely physical creatures without heart, soul, and a range of choices to be made over a lifetime lowers us to the level of animals. And so we are, Rihanna said with a sweep of her fork. I understand your viewpoint as a therapist, Dr. Myra, but mine, as a physiologist, runs down a different lane, so to speak. The decisions we make throughout our life, what we do, how we live, and what we become were printed on our brains while we swam in the womb. Your subject, Eve, was fated to take his life at that time, in that place, and in the manner he chose. Circumstances might have altered it, but the results would have been the same. Eventually, it was, in essence, his destiny. Destiny, Eve thought. Had it been hers to be raped and abused by her own father, to become less than human, to fight her way through that abyss? Myra shook her head slowly. I can't agree. A child born in poverty on the edge of Budapest, taken from the mother at birth and raised in privilege, with love and care in Paris, would reflect that upbringing, that education. The emotional nest, she insisted, and the basic human drive to better oneself can't be discounted. I agree, to a point, Rena qualified. But the stamp of the genetic code, that which predisposes us to achievement, failure, good or evil, if you will, overrides all else. Even with the most loving and nurturing of backgrounds, monsters breed, and in the toilets of the universe, goodness, even greatness, survives. We are what we are, the rest is window dressing. If I subscribe to your theory, Eve said slowly, the subject in question was fated to take his life. No circumstances, no twists or turns of environment would have prevented it. Precisely. The predisposition was there, lurking. Likely an event set it off, but it may have been a minor thing, something easily passed off in another brain pattern. Research still underway at the Bowers Institute has compiled strong evidence of genetic brain patterns and their unassailable influence on behavior. I can get you discs on the subject, if you like. I'll leave the head studies to you and Dr. Myra. Eve shoved her coffee aside. I've got to get back to Cops Central. I appreciate the time, Dr. Myra, she said as she rose. And the theories, Rena, I'd love to discuss them further. Any time. Rena lifted a hand and shook Eve's warmly. Do give my best to Rourke. I will. Eve shifted slightly on her feet when Myra rose to kiss her cheek. I'll be in touch. I hope you will, and not just when you've a case to discuss. Tell Mavis hello for me when you see her. Sure. Hitching her bag on her shoulder, Eve swung her way out, pausing briefly to sneer at the maitre d'. A fascinating woman. Rena slid her tongue in one long, slow lick over the back of her spoon. Controlled, a little angry underneath, straight focused, and unused and vaguely uncomfortable with casual displays of affection. She laughed slightly at Myra's lifted brow. Sorry, professional pitfall. It drives William mad. I didn't mean any offense. I'm sure you didn't. Myra's lips curved, and her eyes warmed with understanding. I often find myself doing the same. And you're right, Eve is a very fascinating woman. Quite self-made, which, I'm afraid, might unbalance your genetic printing theory. Really? Obviously intrigued, Rena leaned forward. You know her well as possible. Eve is a broken bar-contained individual. You're very fond of her, Rena commented with a nod. I hope you won't take it the wrong way if I say she wasn't at all what I expected when I learned Rourke was to marry. That he was to marry at all was a surprise, but I imagined his spouse as a woman of polish and sophistication. A homicide detective who wears her shoulder harness as another woman might an heirloom necklace wasn't my conception of Rourke's choice. Yet they look right together, suited. One might even say, she added with a smile, destined. That I can agree with. Now, tell me, Dr. Myra, what is your opinion of DNA harvesting? Oh, well now a broken bar happily, Myra settled down for a lively busman's holiday. O equals at her desk unit, Eve juggled the data she'd compiled on Fitzhugh, Matthias, and Pearlie. She could find no link, no common ground. The only real correlation between the three was the fact that none of them had exhibited any suicidal tendencies before the fact. Probability the subject cases are related? Eve demanded. Working probability 5.2%. In other words, zip. Eve blew out a breath, scowling automatically when an Airbus rumbled by, rattling her stingy window. Probability of homicide in the matter of Fitzhugh using currently known data. With currently known data, probability of homicide is 8.3%. Give it up, Dallas, she told herself in a mutter. Let it go. Deliberately, she swiveled in her chair, watching the air traffic clog the sky outside her window. Predestination, fate, genetic imprint. If she were to believe in any of that, what was the point of her job or her life, for that matter? If there was no choice, no changing, why struggle to save lives or stand for the dead when the struggle failed? If it was all physiologically coded, had she simply followed the pattern by coming to New York, fighting her way out of the dark to make something decent out of herself? And had it been a smear on that code that had blocked out those early years of her life, that continued to shadow bits and pieces of it even now? And could that code kick in, at any given moment, and make her a reflection of the monster who had been her father? She knew nothing of her other blood kin. Her mother was a blank. If she had siblings, aunts, uncles, or grandparents, they were all lost in that dark void in her memory. She had no one to base her genetic code on but the man who had beaten and raped her throughout childhood until in terror and pain she had struck back, and killed. Blood on her hands at 8 years of age. Is that why she'd become a cop? Was she constantly trying to wash away that blood with rules and law and what some still called justice? Sir Dallas Peabody laid a hand on Eve's shoulder and jumped when Eve jolted. Sorry. Are you all right? Number. Eve pressed her fingers to her eyes. The discussion over dessert had troubled her more than she'd realized. Just a headache. I've got some departmental issue painkillers. Number. Eve was afraid of drugs, even officially sanctioned doses. It'll back off. I'm running out of ideas on the Fitzhugh case. Feeney fed me all known data on the kid on Olympus. I can't find any correlation between him and Fitzhugh or the senator. I've got nothing but piddly shit to hang on Lenore and Arthur. I can request truth detection, but I won't get it. I'm not going to be able to keep it open more than another 24 hours. You still think they're connected? I want them to be connected. And that's a different thing. I haven't exactly given you an impressive lift-off with your first assignment as my permanent aide. Being your permanent aide is the best thing that ever happened to me. Peabody flushed a little. I'd be grateful if we got stuck shoveling through inactives for the next 6 months. You'd still be training me. Eve leaned back in her chair. You're easily satisfied, Peabody. Peabody shifted her gaze until her eyes met Eve's. No, sir. I'm not. When I don't get the best, I get real cranky. Eve laughed, dragged a hand through her hair. You sucking up, officer? No, sir. If I was sucking up, I'd make some personal observation, such as marriage obviously agrees with you, Lieutenant. You've never looked lovelier. Peabody smiled a little when Eve snorted. That's how you'd know I was sucking up. So noted. Eve considered a moment, then cocked her head. Didn't you tell me your family are free agers? Peabody didn't roll her eyes, but she wanted to. Yes, sir. Cops don't usually spring from free agers. Artists, farmers, the occasional scientist, lots of craft workers. I didn't like weaving mats. Can you? If held at laser point. So, what? Your family pissed you off and you decided to break the mold, go into a field dramatically removed from pacifism? No, sir. Puzzled at the line of questioning, Peabody shrugged. My family's great. We're still pretty tight. They're not going to understand what I do or want to do, but they never tried to block me. I just wanted to be a cop, the same way my brother wanted to be a carpenter and my sister a farmer. One of the strongest tenets of free ageism is self-expression. But you don't fit the genetic code, Eve muttered and drummed her fingers on her desk. You don't fit. Heredity and environment, gene patterns, they all should have influenced you differently. The bad guys wished I had been, Peabody said soberly. But I'm here, keeping our city safe. If you get an urge to weave a mat, you'll be the first to know. Eve's unit beeped twice, signaling incoming data. Additional autopsy report on the kid. Eve gestured for Peabody to come closer. List any abnormal brain pattern, she ordered. Microscopic abnormality, right cerebral hemisphere, frontal lobe, left quadrant. Unexplained. Further research and testing underway. Well, I think we just caught a break. Display visual of frontal lobe and abnormality. The cross-section of the brain popped on screen. There. A quick surge of excitement churned in her belly as Eve tapped the screen. That shadowy pinprick. See it? Barely. Peabody leaned closer until she was all but cheek to cheek with Eve. Looks like a flaw on the display. No, a flaw in the brain. Increase quadrant 6, 20%. The picture shifted, and the section with the shadow filled the screen. More of a burn than a hole, isn't it? Eve said half to herself. Hardly there, but what kind of damage, what kind of influence would it have on behavior, personality, decision-making? I pretty well dumped my required abnormal physiology at the academy. Peabody moved her sturdy shoulders. I did better in psych, better yet in tactics. This is over my head. Mine, too, Eve admitted. But it's a link. Our first one. Computer, cross-section of brain abnormality, Fitzhugh, file 12871. Split screen with current display. The screen jittered, went to fuzzy gray. Eve swore, smacked it with the heel of her hand, and bumped out a shaky image blurred across the center. Son of a bitch. Son of a bitch. This cheap shit we have to use around here. It's a wonder we can close a case on jaywalking. Download all data, you bastard. On disk. Maybe if you sent this unit into maintenance, Peabody suggested, and received a snarl. It was supposed to be overhauled while I was away. The fuckers in maintenance have their fingers up their butts. I'm going to run this through one of Rourke's units. She caught Peabody's lifted brow and tapped her foot as she waited for the wheezy machine to download. You got a problem with that, officer? No, sir. Peabody tucked her tongue in her cheek and decided against mentioning the series of codes Eve was about to break. No problem here. Fine. Get to work on the red tape and get me the brain scan of the senator for comparison. Peabody's smug little smile fell away. You want me to bump heads with East Washington? Your head's hard enough to handle it. Eve ejected the disk and pocketed it. Call me when you get it. The minute you get it. Yes, sir. If we get a link there, we're going to need an expert analyst. Yeah? Eve thought of Rihanna. I might just have one. Get moving, Peabody. Moving, Lieutenant.